Well, let me greet you and welcome you to today's program. And I'm going to be a little bit unusual, I'll admit, today. I don't know why, but that's just how I feel at the moment. And so I'm speaking from Exodus chapter 3, and I'm in the authorized version, the King James. Now, here it starts off, and I'm always intrigued by Moses, particularly, I think, because Moses had 3 lives, literally. He was born, spent the first 40 years as in the king's palace with the king's daughter. So he had quite a high position there in the first 40 years, living in luxury. But because he killed somebody, it's quite clear that he fled to the wilderness, and he was out there for another 40 years keeping sheep. And then it's only when this takes place that I'm going to be reading about, he entered into his third 40 years. So he lived to 120. That's what I'm hoping to do. Anyway, so it says that Moses kept the flock of his father-in-law, who was a priest, and led the flock in the back of the desert and came to the mountain of God, which is Horeb. And there, this is where I'm really interested, the angel of the Lord appeared to him. Now, most of us assume that it was actually God there, but here it says it was an angel of the Lord appeared to him in fire in the middle of a bush. And although the bush was on fire, it was not destroyed. So this was quite intriguing. I mean, fires in the desert places are not unusual. I was always amused traveling on the Trans-Siberian Express across Russia, the number of fires that were started because traveling on that journey 7 days or 10 days, getting from Moscow to the far side of Siberia, people would spend a lot of time drinking vodka. They would throw the bottles out of the window. They got smashed. And it was actually the broken glass which reflected the light of the sun and caused fires. This is a different story. The fire was there, but it was God, and the bush wasn't destroyed. So in verse 3, Moses said, I will now turn aside and look and see what this is. He wants to know why the bush wasn't burned. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside, God called to him out of the middle of the bush, out of the middle of the fire. So at the beginning, it's an angel of the Lord that appeared. But by the time we get to verse 4, it was the Lord who saw that he turned aside, and God called him out of the midst of the fire and spoke to him, Moses. And Moses answered, said, yes, I'm here. And it's then that he gets the instruction to take his shoes off because he was on holy ground. And I'm quite intrigued. We're moving into something here which, for some reason, has intrigued me. In verse 6, God describes himself. And here, and you'll find he's described in different ways in this same chapter, but you find here, God says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Yes, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look on God. But I'm intrigued because so often in the Bible, God is referred to in a very personal way. And I regard this as personal because he says, I'm your father's God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, the God of Jacob. So God describes himself in the fact that he has appeared to and has been known by the predecessors. It's interesting. And in verse 7, the Lord said, I've seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cry for reason of their taskmasters. I know their sorrow. And in verse 8, I am come down to deliver them. And I love this bit, and I preached on this particularly in places like Ukraine, where I can say, God has actually said, I am come down. In other words, here, the children of Israel are in persecution. The children of Israel are afflicted. They're slaves in the land of Egypt. As far as I'm concerned, they probably were the slave labor that built the pyramids. That's about the time. But he says, God says, not I will come down, but I am already come down. And God is not the God just of the future. He is the God of the past, the present, and the future, as we'll see in a moment. And his promise is to deliver Israel and to take them into the land of Canaan. And with all that's going on in Israel and Gaza at the moment in the news, certainly as I'm talking to you, there supposedly is a peace agreement between Israel and Gaza, but by the time you listen to me, I doubt if it will still be peace. I'm sorry, but that's the way the situation is. But God is promising two things. One, to deliver Israel, and secondly, to give them their own territory. Right. And in verse 9 he says, therefore, the cry of the children of Israel is come up to me, and I've seen the way that they are oppressed. I mean, this is Israel. I mean, one reason why Israel was so determined to have their own nation was the Holocaust. And it's quite interesting that so often out of suffering, it becomes the desperation for their own land. And sadly, even in Britain, and I'm speaking in Britain, even in Britain today, Jewish people are afraid because they are being attacked. Not for simply being people, but because simply they are Jews. And the whole history of Israel, of the Jewish people, is of oppression. And here, God is very saying, I've seen the oppression, and I believe God is saying it today. And one of the miracles of the Bible is the fact that now, for the first time in more than 2,000 years, that Israel have their own land, that the Jewish people have their own homeland, Israel. But he goes on, and he says, come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring the people out of Egypt. And in verse 11, Moses, in humility, he's a shepherd keeping sheep. He's convicted, well, yes, if he wants, convicted for killing somebody. And he says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So often this is a question that we have to ask. I mean, even I have to ask. I know that God has called me and I know what God wants me to do, but even I have to say, who am I to do it? And the answer comes very clearly in verse 12. The promise of God to Moses was, I will be